Hi, welcome to Rev'd for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm Justin Crisp.
I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And today we are taking a look at the gospel lesson for Ash Wednesday, one of the two major fasts of the church, along with Good Friday. I just have to say, this is an invitation to practice Lent, but not to do so too publicly. A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, the 6th chapter. Jesus said, "Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." The Gospel of the Lord. What do you make of this?
I love Ash Wednesday reading. I think this is one of the greatest hits of our year. You know, we get it every year, so I feel like every year it's sort of a recalibrating moment, and we know what's coming. I love that we've chosen this, our church has chosen this reading because these practices are not suggestions, for Jesus. They're presumed, and the Jews practiced this piety, and they gave alms, they prayed, they fasted as a matter of course in their religious practice. And so here Jesus is reorienting them as to the motivation for these practices. So, to give alms was a humanitarian thing, but first and foremost, it was a religious obligation. And they did it, and the person who would give the most got the most praise and had the most power. The person who could give the most was the most powerful. And it was a show of, righteousness or exceedingly generosity or, being right with God in the most public and the largesse. And they like the largesse to show. And I think we like that in our own time too. Everybody likes their name on a plaque after they've helped support a cause, which isn't a terrible thing. It's just different than the practice of the inner life faith. So I think Jesus here is pulling apart the religious practice from the practice of faith. And he's calling these disciples into a practice of faith that takes place in the inner life and does not require praise from the public. And so I think that it's a really nuanced, very important teaching. And it's ironic that we do it on a day that is the most public show of our religious practice, which is, walking around with ashes on our foreheads. So I think there's a great tension, and it plays with our own sense of intention and piety and conflict and paradox. And, we're all just walking paradoxes. And I think that it's drawing attention, putting a big spotlight on our own inner relationship with God, so that we're having to attune our inner ear to that high frequency of where's God in this? And am I doing this for show, or am I doing this because I'm really humbling myself in the sight of God alone, regardless of what anybody else can say or think? So I think it's an important moment in our year that we come back to every year to bring us back to that quiet place.
So thank you for that. And yes, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, we're talking about a backbone of Jewish spirituality here. And when the comment is we write as practicing your piety, and this really should be translated, or would be translated, practicing your righteousness. And righteousness is your all-in way to God. And that's what he's talking about here. And sure, there's no doubt that the theme of it is who you're being seen by. You're being seen, but who, and you're being rewarded. Who's seeing matters, and whose reward matters, right? So you are being seen by God at all times, and you're being seen by humans, and where does the reward structure come from? I think that the issues, and one of the things you're often bringing up is in the relationship to the early church and to Matthew. So all Middle Eastern religions have fasting as a major a piece of their piety. I mean, take a look at our brothers and sisters in Islam. They have Ramadan and they fast, and fasting is a major thing in the Hebrew Scriptures. They're fasting for all kinds of reasons. They're fasting to get God's attention. They're having national fasts for to defend themselves. They're having days of mourning. They're fasting all the time. The prophets talk about fasting all the time. And so, yes, Jesus assumes the fasting because this is how it was done. And even in the early church, the Christians fasted. We see that in the Scriptures, right? I mean, the Pharisees fasted twice a week. We're told that, and we're also told that John the Baptist people fast. And how come Jesus's people don't fast? And in the Didache, we get that everybody fasts. Yes. And that's a twice a week thing. That's a Wednesday, Friday undertaking. So the idea of fasting, we've lost the thread that was a major thread in Jesus's day. Really.
Now we fast to lose weight.
Right, which according to this is not fasting, right? That's a diet. And that's what I used to love to say. If you're going to fast to lose weight, you're going to have a Lenten diet. But anyway, it wouldn't be considered a Lenten fast. Right. And so we have a situation where Jesus is, as you say, describing the question of the inner life, the question of the heart versus the outer life, the question of. And notice that everybody gets rewarded. It's just is God giving the reward or human beings giving the reward? And then he says, you'll be glorified. It's not even like you're going to be honored. You're going to be glorified. You're going to be Godified because glory is even a higher level word than honored. And do you want to become a little God in your giving kind of thing here, or in your praying? And I think that what Jesus lays out for us is, these are the only spiritual disciplines that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount. This is it. And of course we've left out the Lord's Prayer. So he tells us in here what's the content of our prayer also. To pray in secret and what we should be praying about in secret. So I've got more to say, but I want to hand it over to the theologian in residence here because there is much more packed in here, even about our Father. The whole question of the patri of God rather than the Adonai, the lordship of God, and then God as judge, and all this stuff gets mixed together. But Justin, let's hear
completely.
From you.
If I might just say a word about that in particular. So Father is Jesus's preferred way of addressing God, and part of what's going on in his invitation to the Lord's Prayer is he's inviting his followers into his own prayer, right? He's saying that you can now call God by the same name that I call God, which is a familial term. It's a kinship term, right? And it's supposed to connote both intimacy, I think, and also authority at the same time. But it's more intimate than Adonai. It's more intimate than Lord. This term of kinship, intimacy, is in some ways a whole summary of what Jesus does. If Jesus is God's son by nature, we become God's children by grace, and that is a kind of summary of the whole Christian faith and life. This is kind of the point of the whole thing, is to be able to have this parental relationship with the mysterious something or other which made the universe and brought it into being. I actually love the poetry of this particular passage, at least in its English translation. I'm sure the poetry is preserved preserved in the original Greek. But the poetry of the English translation, which we hear every single year, it becomes a kind of, the refrain has a cadence. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret is reward to you. And this word secret, I think is just brilliant. I have to say, I was really moved by Valerie Whitmer, who is who's a parishioner here, who read a lesson a few Sundays ago it was the epistle lesson for Sunday a few Sundays ago from, I believe it was 1 Corinthians, and it was referring to God's decrees before the foundation of the world, and the way that she read the word secret and hidden, those two words, secret and hidden, it communicated the mysteriousness and also, I think, the loveliness of that, what Paul is getting at in that particular passage. And I love this word secret. One of the reasons why I love it is because the Father is invisible, right? So if you think about the theology of the New Testament, the theology of John in particular, one of the purposes of Jesus is to make the Father visible. We have beheld the glory as of a Father's only Son, et cetera, from the prologue of the Gospel of John. But the Father is invisible, but Jesus is visible. And there's something about holiness, Jesus is saying, which is also invisible. The Father is secret, and true, genuine holiness is also secret. And I'll say that as a priest, this goes with the grain of my own experience. I'll just say I have learned very quickly. I've only been ordained for, I think I'm going on 9 years from my diaconal ordination, and 8 from my priesthood ordination. In just that amount of time, I have discovered that people are secretly holy, and you would never expect it. I would never expect it because I'm a sinner, and I am full of judgment, just like everybody else. I mean, we judge each other like an infinite number of times a day. And I'll just say, I now have Jesus has been a holy stumbling block, a scandalon in my judgment, because I have just discovered over and over and over that people are not who I thought they were going to be. And people who you may never expect secretly to be holy actually are. And so it's a good reminder, I think, to all of us, both this invitation to the inner life, both this invitation to faith, as you were saying, Elizabeth, and also that the inner life of a person is not accessible to us, but is actually only accessible to God. And that for me is humbling in a way that is not saddening, but gladdening. Because there's always more going on in a person's life and in a person's soul than I ever expect. I do want to put on the table here that Jesus' teaching about the secrecy of holiness and not performing your piety before others, etc., is in tension with something he said just a few verses ago, which is, speaking of the Whitmers, it is Frederick Whitmer's confirmation verse when Frederick was confirmed. It is, let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven, which was in the gospel lesson also just a few Sundays ago. It's in the context of Jesus saying, I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Anybody want to take a stab at what this tension is about? Let your light so shine before others, but don't practice your piety before others? What in the world are you doing?
I wrote that in my own margin too. That's so funny.
Nice.
Oh, wow. Well, I think that the tension might be that here we're talking about collective practices that the community does together. Whenever you give alms, whenever you pray, whenever you fast, these are, as you said, the backbone of their practice and piety. And to let your light shine and let your good works be seen, those are the works of justice to me when Jesus is talking. They're the works of the radical goodness and mercy in the world and kindness and putting your neck out for people who need help. And to me, that's the light of Christ that is against the culture of his time, that there were the purity codes and all that stuff. And so often it was justified to leave a lot of people out and to not associate with unholy or people that were considered sinners or marginal people. So I think I'm making a big leap there, but I think that the context of that verse is in how the community treated one another in their relationships and how they treated one another in their culture vis-a-vis the other people living among them and stuff like that. But so to me, the good works in that verse is about justice and kindness and radical inclusion and solidarity with the poor and things like that. And that's where people could give glory to God in heaven. And here it's personal piety, and it's collective because they did it together in the community. But here Jesus is drawing people into doing it in secret, like you said. I don't know. That's one thought I have on it. I was going to say, well, Peter, maybe you want to answer that too first.
Well, I would. My take on that is holiness has an inner light that that shines forth regardless of a person, whether or not the person wants it to shine forth or not. In the ancient tradition, they used to talk about. I'm going to get the word wrong, and it's going to sound bad, but it's good. That there's a kind of scent of prayer, or a kind of odoriferousness or something that you can kind of smell it on somebody, you can kind of see it, you can sense it. It's a vibration. The Eastern tradition might talk about it with reference to a vibration. It's just there.
I was just reading Gregory of Nyssa, and he calls it a perfume.
Perfume, thank you.
Yes, you can smell it. You're exactly right.
Odoriferous, which doesn't, it's clearly not. But yeah, that's
holiness is smelling.
Holiness smells. Yeah. Smells good.
Yeah.
Ode to prayer.
Laid it next from Calvin Klein. What else were you going to add, Elizabeth?
I was just going to pick up on something you said, Peter, that these are the only three, what did you say, the three instructions for practice?
They're the three spiritual disciplines that practices that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, I think I would add a fourth, which later comes in chapter 7, do not worry. And I think that for Jesus, that's a major practice. And it's very, very hard for us to do. And it's sort of a discipline. And so to tie that here, I think that this inner relationship with God that Jesus is calling us into by these practices is that we worry that we're not getting it right or doing enough, or we just are just so distracted by the worries of our lives, the outer lives, our clothing and food and whatever else. And it's a real discipline to not worry and let things go and be in that posture of prayer where your hands are open and you're ready to receive and you're letting go of all these things and all the possibilities that you're not doing it right. And also the worry that God does see you and know what's in your heart or what you think is in your heart. And so the not to worry is this gift of grace and ease that God actually loves you. And God actually wants to be in the relationship with us. And it's our work to practice in a way that lives into the relationship. So all these Lenten disciplines then don't become just for our own reformation, but for the relationship that we are called into being for. And so that changes everything. When you're giving or praying or fasting, it's a whole different orientation and mindset to think, I'm doing this with God, for God, and in the presence of God, for the God in others. And, to give is to participate in the repair of the world and to the building up of the body and the mission. To pray is to be in communion with God and enjoy the relationship. And it's joy. It's like, what are we going to experience today, God? I think God is with us in a way that's so much more fun than we give it any credence for. And then when we're fasting, it's not to deprive ourselves of our little luxuries like chocolate and all that stuff. Fasting is to give us a gateway into what it means to be hungry and what it means to have an awareness and a consciousness of people who just don't have enough, and then to act. So I think that that's out of love and gentleness, and I think these kinds of things can break our hearts open in a way that really lets God in, and that the whole point of these practices is because God's waiting there, waiting for us to be in the relationship that we're created to have. for me, that's the secret sauce. It's just how Jesus is totally reframing what these practices can do for us and what they can do for the world.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting in both accounts what you're saying. I just note that the word for secret in Greek is crypto.
Oh, nice.
Which I happen to think is hilarious given the most recent crypto.
Oh, my gosh.
And also, I would like to comment on two things. I know. Is that so good? That's worth a whole other podcast, but I'm just going to let
We're getting some comments about that one, Peter. People in the crypto markets.
The other thing I'd like to just talk about here for a moment is the question of the tension of don't let your piety be seen, and people walk around with ashes smushed on their forehead. I think there's several things happening here, and you have to take a look at it in all the readings that are part of the lections for Ash Wednesday. These are ancient lections, and the Ash Wednesday is you named Good Friday also. These are essentially our public days of fasting, just like the Day of Atonement in the Jewish tradition. And the question of marking your face and this which in the Day of Atonement is obviously a national day for all of the people for all of the Israelites and now all of the Jewish people, and this is our public fasting day. But the 40 days of Lent, which mimics Jesus' 40 days in the desert in the wilderness, is not. And so many of the instructions here have to do not with the public fast, the day, that one single day of the public fast, but really of the 40 days of fasting. So that's my whack at how can you walk around with this and not be a hypocrite. And to note also that a hypocrite is the Greek term for a stage actor.
Yes.
And so don't be like the actors. And so all the Shakespeare, all the world is a stage, right? And the question is who's viewing you at the stage, and are you doing this so that the crowd goes, oh, bravo, bravo, or are you doing it for the divine? I'm gonna take a whack at something here that I was gobsmacked by, that I learned in studying for this, and let me see if I can get it out. And I like to. This is not. I'm a parish priest. Okay, so there's things, which means I only know like a little bit. But this comes from a guy named Dr. Piety, or Petra, and I stumbled on it called The Biblical Roots of Lent in the Catholic Productions. And he put something on the table that I had never heard before. And let me see if I can articulate this for all of you. So let's find ourselves back at the fall, where the whole drama begins. So the fall begins, chapter 2, verse 4a, the Adam and Eve story, and the apple and the Adam and Eve story. This is, and in this, as we know in the story, Adam gives in to all of these temptations. And the first is food and the pleasure of eating. The second is the apple as a delight to the eye, the delight to possess the apple. And the third is wisdom, to be wise, and the pride of being known for being wise. And you brought this up recently, Elizabeth, in a pod, maybe even the last pod we did. Pleasure, possessions, and pride, sex, money, and power. The root of all of our issues here. That I think was even in the last podcast. Yep. And now let's go to the next podcast we're going to do, which is Jesus' 40 days in the desert. And what do we have? But we have food as pleasure. We have possessions. You can have all these kingdoms can be yours. And we have pride. Let's show everybody you're the Messiah by you leaping off what they believe to. Scholars believe to be actually one of the corners of the Temple Mount, not the pinnacle per se. They didn't have a pinnacle like churches have pinnacles, but this was the farthest fall. You can see it when you're there. And so what are we fasting for on Ash Wednesday? Well, Adam gives in on the pleasure, possession, and pride. Jesus goes into the desert and does not give in on pleasure, possessions, and pride. And so when we fast from food, which is what the fasting primarily is, we're talking about fasting. The discipline of fasting, which is you would fast during the day and eat at night. This is how these people fasted. But you would have the fasting from the overcome physical pleasures. And when you give alms, you overcome our attachment to things and money. And when we pray, we are helped to overcome our disordered self-love, which is so prideful, and to try to live from a holy disposition to God. And so what this man put on the table for me was the idea that these three disciplines, which were the core disciplines of Lent. I mean, Lent is never meant to be only what you've given up, right? It was the ancient Lent was all three of these disciplines, but these disciplines were not random. They not only were the backbone of Jewish spirituality, of early Christian spirituality, but they were the issues that were right there in the garden. They were Jesus issues and then garden issues, and that it was all connected. And so therefore the purpose of a holy Lent is not to lose weight.
Oh wow, that's really good. I'm grateful to Dr. Piety, if I'm saying that correctly, and to you for sharing it with us. It strikes me that the two great fasts of the church mark first the acknowledgement of the results of the fall, the catastrophe of our first parents,
That's a good call.
Sin and death, right? Those are the two themes of Ash Wednesday. Repentance and acknowledgement that we're going to die, and those two things dovetail in a certain way in the liturgy and in the texts and the prayers. And then on Good Friday, you get, I know this gets into the question of the atonement, which is to open up a huge Pandora's box. But I'll just say, I think that the Jesus' death and his resurrection work together in order to remedy sin and death, in order to remedy the results of the fall. So not just Good Friday, but Good Friday and the rest of the Triduum, the whole Paschal mystery. But Good Friday is the beginning of it, right? The Good Friday is at the very least God in Christ being submerged under the water, God in Christ drowning in the water of sin and death, being pulled down into the deep. It's at the very least that, regardless of how else one wants to unpack the atonement, which is a subject for a whole podcast sometime. So you acknowledge the problem, and you begin to celebrate the solution, and the church acknowledges both of these as its primary fasts now. And there's some real wisdom to that, because I'm enamored of your account of fasting as being really about the cultivation of that relationship, right? So it follows from the relationship in some sense naturally. The relationship comes first, and then you fast in order for that relationship to continue to flourish. Yeah. I'm enamored of what you're laying out, Peter, about pleasure, possession, and pride being undone by almsgiving and prayer and fasting, and it makes me think that the true purpose of fasting. You were getting at this a moment ago, Peter. The purpose of fasting is not simply to do without, but is to do without for a purpose of some kind. And I'll just say, I don't think that Christianity is all sackcloth and ashes. I preached a sermon about this recently. I really don't. Jesus said in the Gospel of John, I have come that you might have life and might have it more abundantly. And regardless of the fact we're in Matthew, Jesus in Matthew is also about the abundant life. He's always eating with people. He's always celebrating and so on. Jesus is the life of the party, as I said in my sermon. But in order to, I'll just say, my experience of fasting is that in letting go, I discover that these things are gifts. The things which I have gone without are gifts from God. And once I receive them again as a gift, rather than things which belong to me or things which I solely earned under my own, by my own ingenuity and power and so on, I receive them as a gift, which makes them mean more and makes them more pleasurable, more alive than they were before. Especially the really big things that you fast from, right? Chocolate, good start. But really big things that you might try to give over to God. It's almost as though our fasting is like Kierkegaard retelling the story of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. He doesn't have to sacrifice Isaac. That's kind of the point of the story. He waits, and then he receives Isaac back. He's willing to do it, but then Abraham receives Isaac back because God says, no, don't go through with it. You're all good. And I think that, what must Abraham and Isaac's relationship be like after that point? Awkward, certainly, got some explaining to do, but also unbelievably special. Their relationship means something after that willingness to hold the knife to Isaac's throat that it didn't before. It's a crazy, crazy, crazy image, but I think that our fasting is kind of like that. The things which we give over to God are returned to us. It's just like on the altar in the Eucharist. We give God bread and wine, and then they come back to us as carriers of his own presence, vessels of his own presence, the body and blood of his Son, and so on. God, we're always sacrificing to God. The loveliness about Christianity is that God begins to sacrifice to us. And so I think that as we go into Lent, I hope that people discover that. I know that we're running a little low on time here, but I don't want to leave without discussing this last paragraph here and what it connotes, namely death. Right, this line about "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume." Because this is a huge part of the experience of Ash Wednesday. The words that are said when you receive the ashes are, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Remember that you're going to die. And to do this and to say this in a culture that really avoids, as I recently heard Bishop Jeff, our new bishop here in Connecticut, say, avoids death with a lowercase and death with a uppercase D. We are terrified of both of these things. We cannot mourn either death, little d, or death, big D. It's a very powerful thing. And I wonder if you guys have a comment on either what Jesus is up to in this last section, or just about why are we going around reminding people they're going to die?
Because it's true. It's coming for everybody. Yeah. And we don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it, but I think it's just obviously it's unavoidable. But I love the imagery that comes to mind for me in this passage about storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven and not treasures on earth, is that the storing up of treasures on earth is a real guarding, like we really build a wall or put it in bank or seriously protect our stuff, and we put up walls and we are insuring ourselves against loss, and it's all wise and important. We need to do that in our temporal life, but when it's all consuming to protect our stuff so much without actually putting it to use and enjoying it, and even risking some of it a little more than we're comfortable with to invest in something or build up a project or give it to something that's meaningful and doing something to repair the earth or repair the world or fight against injustice. I think the image of storing up treasures in heaven is investing in this lifetime all the things we would love to see the world become, and all the things that we would love to ourselves to become and our children to become, and putting ourselves and our stuff out there to really be workhorses for good. And we might die on a razor's edge with not much left, but that's what Jesus did. And he's, nothing can destroy that. He's completely invested in us and in our world and in the earth. He's completely poured out. And, when we receive the Eucharist and we become the body and blood of Christ, broken and poured out for the world, it's not just wantonly spend your money and things like that, but it's to be so willing to relinquish our hold on our stuff when it's actually needed somewhere, or when we can use it to entertain or, create life or create joy or discover places or take people into experiences and stuff like that. That's the imagery that conjures for me, is just the looseness, the fast and loose kind of, let's just tackle life. It's so short. It's fleeting. Every day we're dying. We're one day closer to that death. And imagine if you just spend your whole life for the good of, or the joy of the world. I mean, good is so pious, but it's also joyful. So I don't know. I think all of us have those passions where we can see the needs of the world and we get excited about changing it or investing in it. And that can be a treasure for heaven,
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. Beautiful. I just say that assuredly what Jesus is talking about are spiritual rewards, whether or not it's in this life or in the life to come. And that the spiritual rewards that Jesus is referring to, if you're not interested in spiritual rewards, the whole thing is dumb, right? And there's an inner contentment and satisfaction that whose reward is beyond the beyond. And for people who give their life away and then their stuff too, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Jesus' comment that is in the Acts of the Apostles. It really is to say that there is a thing that is way deep down in your being that nobody can take from you, and it just feels fantastic because you did it. You gave it away. And people who give their lives away feel this, even though they might not have much left. And so that is for this life and for the life to come. This question of store up your treasures in heaven, this was well known in the Hebraic dialects of the day. I mean, Jesus wasn't making anything up. He was just talking about the stuff that people talked about. And there is there's the great paradox to it all, which is if you hoard your stuff, you lose it, and if you get rid of it, you get it. And so it's back to this. Those who seek to save their life for my sake will lose it, and those who, it's this reversal of things that Jesus talks about all the time. And so I'll just finish by saying, and I know we have to finish up, and I told the story one other time, but when I was at All Saints in Phoenix, and I went to our founding father, the man who started our church, and to tell him that we needed $1 million, and we were going to name a room after him or something like this. And I got there. This was the day it was 138 degrees in my green van. I don't know if you've heard this story.
Oh my gosh,
it was so hot in Phoenix. Oh my God, it was like Hades. Anyway, and I went to see him. His name was Henry, and I sat down with him. And I said, Henry, you're our St. Paul, and we need $1 million. And he said, too late. I already gave it away. This is the guy who used to own Camelback Mountain. He owned Camelback Mountain. And he said, no, I gave it away. He said, our Lord died a poor man, and who am I to die a rich man? Wow. So I gave the money away. And so, I mean, there are people that do this.
Yeah.
Wow. God bless Henry. I wish he gave the $1 million to All Saints.
Oh my gosh. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, both of you. Just to say, we invite you all to the observance of a Holy Lent in whatever way, with whatever fast it is that you choose. We have a way that you might incorporate more spiritual discipline into your life by delving deeply into the Word as we do every single week. And so we have Maranatha house churches, as they're known here at St. Mark's. These are small groups which meet both here in the church and also online on Zoom. There are 2 Maranatha house churches available on Zoom. It doesn't matter if you live in Phoenix or you live in you live in Detroit or you live in Montreal. You can come and you can be a part of one of these Zoom house churches. These are small groups that meet for prayer, and they gather around the Word, and they're gathering around our conversation to get your conversation started. When 2 or 3 gather in the name of our Lord, He really does come. And Maranatha is the last prayer in the New Testament, as Father Peter is fond of reminding us in the book of Revelation. It means to come. It means to pray the Lord to come. And we pray that the Lord would come to you, either in a Maranatha house church or certainly in any way the Lord deigns to, and would be for your good this Lent. God bless you.